should she manage this budget shortfall while she's working full-time at your bank?
I and the police officers that we work hand in glove with across this country are excited to do the work.
Regarding the first entry, she recited the description, the destruction protocol, the approval cipher, and the calendar date. The second entry followed suit with its description, the destruction protocol, the approval cipher, and the calendar date. The third, fourth, fifth, and sixth entries proceeded in a remarkably similar fashion. She had recited the entry digit and 4 descriptive words when Kash Patel shoved his seat away from the testimony desk and stood upright. Without asking for a break or lifting a hand to seek authorization, the man simply got up, pivoted, and walked 2 paces toward the rear of the congressional chamber. The committee leader firmly declared, "Director Patel, you remain bound by a legal summons, and you must proceed back to the testimony desk without delay." The official halted his movement and remained positioned with his spine facing the panel for 3 full seconds. Those 3 seconds were entirely recorded by every single broadcast lens positioned inside the legislative chamber. Over that 3-second span, the chamber generated a noise entirely unprecedented in any previous session, a noise that was not quietness, but rather a hybrid of quietness and the simultaneous gasp of 60 individuals who had just observed the head of the Federal Bureau try to abandon an active legislative inquiry. Following that pause, the man rotated his body, strolled back over to the testimony desk, and took his designated seat. Representative Porter fixed her gaze upon him, glanced toward the panel, reviewed her paperwork, and resumed reciting the 6th entry. Allow me to clarify what an asset destruction record entails before detailing why the 6th entry triggered such a severe and dramatic reaction. An asset destruction record serves as the formal accounting of whatever occurred to materials held in government possession that were subsequently eliminated, relocated, or otherwise discarded. Each piece of material moving through government possession as an exhibit is strictly monitored, with its intake, physical state, and exact placement documented, and once it leaves possession, the justification for its extraction is recorded, detailing its nature, its method of elimination, the commanding authority, and the specific time frame. This comprehensive ledger essentially acts as the ultimate proof regarding what actually transpired with the federal investigative materials. The Federal Bureau preserves these destruction records as a fundamental component of its material administration architecture. These ledgers remain entirely open to institutional monitoring, deeply vulnerable to legal summons, and fully accessible for legislative examination. Representative Porter formally requisitioned the specific Epstein material destruction record exactly 6 weeks prior to this congressional event. The lawmaker has served as the elected voice for the 45th Legislative District of California since the year 2019. Prior to her legislative tenure, the official worked as an academic instructing consumer statutes at a prominent university located in Irvine. Her entire professional life has involved analyzing paperwork detailing the fate of items that corporate entities desired to vanish, including elimination ledgers, termination warrants, and relocation registries. These specific files exist precisely because structural responsibility dictates that the eradication of objects must be documented, even if the organizations themselves would much rather avoid such transparency. The Congresswoman thoroughly understands how to interpret an elimination ledger, comprehends the true implication of each notation, and recognizes the boundary between standard discarding and abnormal eradication. The official possesses the distinct expertise to spot whenever an approval cipher gets deployed for objectives far beyond its originally designed operational parameters. The representative recognizes exactly what it resembles when a termination registry indicates that specific materials were eradicated when they absolutely should have been permanently preserved. The lawmaker had dedicated 6 consecutive weeks to scrutinizing the Epstein material elimination ledger in exhaustive detail. The extensive review uncovered particular notations that demanded immediate and official legislative scrutiny from the committee. The Congresswoman carried those specific notations into the legislative chamber, placed the ledger upon her desk, and commenced reciting from the very first notation. The initial 5 notations held substantial and undeniable operational importance for the congressional oversight members, Every single entry symbolized physical material that had been systematically eradicated from the comprehensive Epstein investigative archive. Every single notation featured a distinct elimination protocol, a specific approval cipher, and an exact calendar day. Every notation recited in chronological order contributed to a broader understanding of exactly what had been purged from the inquiry archive and precisely when it occurred. However, the initial 5 notations were interpreted by seasoned testifiers and legal counsel merely as discrete notations within a clerical ledger, undeniably concerning, but still within a threshold where individuals present could maintain their absolute composure while listening. The 6th notation proved fundamentally distinct from the previous records detailed during the congressional hearing. The representative managed to recite just 4 words of its summary before the director rose to his feet, articulating the entry digit followed by merely 4 descriptive words. The bureau chief had evidently listened to an adequate amount of the public legislative recitation. The committee leader ordered the man to return. He complied, and Representative Porter resumed her steady recitation of the 6th notation. The complete summary of the 6th notation, spoken into the official transcript in full, outlined a distinct classification of tangible materials, items previously held in federal custody, assets classified as current with an anticipated termination deadline supposedly set for a later time frame, materials that the ledger indicated were eradicated prematurely via an approval cipher originating from an elite tier within the agency, utilizing an elimination protocol explicitly classified as entirely irreversible. This unequivocally meant the irreversible elimination of current investigative materials prior to their designated termination deadline through approval granted by a specialized hierarchical leadership tier. Furthermore, the 6th notation corresponded directly to a particular calendar day that absolutely everyone present would immediately identify within the dense framework of the Epstein inquiry. The Congresswoman placed the ledger upon her desk the moment her recitation concluded and directed her focused gaze toward the bureau chief. "Director," the lawmaker stated, "you rose to your feet during the 6th notation before my summary concluded," and then she allowed a brief, tense silence. "I fully intend to question you regarding the specific details of the 6th notation." The director responded that debating material elimination protocols within a public legislative forum provoked complicated secrecy classifications and policing confidentiality issues. The Congresswoman retorted, "I am entirely unconcerned with secrecy classifications, as my inquiry targets this specific notation, specifically focusing on the approval cipher displayed on this particular line." The representative angled the ledger toward the broadcast lenses to ensure the approval cipher section remained completely observable to the public. "The approval clearance displayed right here aligns with an exclusive echelon deeply embedded within the Federal Bureau leadership structure." The lawmaker then revealed a supplementary paper, identifying it as the official agency clearance tier diagram for material elimination rulings before flipping directly to the applicable section. The approval cipher attached to the 6th notation aligns perfectly with Supreme Leadership Tier clearance. The representative forcefully positioned the agency clearance diagram directly next to the disputed material elimination ledger. The Congresswoman locked eyes with him, noting she had served on the panel long enough to witness uneasy testifiers grasping for hydration, exhibiting trembling fingers, having legal counsel leap to their feet, and having secondary attorneys plead the Fifth Amendment. The lawmaker glanced at the ledger and declared she had never previously witnessed an agency director simply stand up and attempt to completely depart the secured premises. The representative placed the documents flatly upon her desk, emphasizing that the 6th notation, his attempted exit, his eventual return, the leadership tier approval cipher, and the official petition demanding the unmasking data were all now permanently inscribed within the transcript with an active 7-day deadline. The powerful bureau chief maintained his absolute and unbreakable verbal silence. The elimination ledger firmly stands as the definitive chronicle detailing the ultimate and irreversible fate of those federal investigative materials. The 6th notation represents merely a singular printed line within that expansive chronicle, one lonely documented piece among numerous others. Yet, It remains the singular notation that triggered a physical reaction entirely unmatched by any other component during this session or any previous session within this lengthy legislative sequence. The agency chief rose and attempted to abscond. The committee leader forbade it, the official returned, and the profound mystery regarding what exactly he sought to escape when taking those 2 paces remains officially lodged with the watchdog and the Justice Department beneath a strict 7-day countdown timer. The first notation, the second notation, the third notation, the fourth notation, the fifth notation, and finally the heavily disputed 6th notation. 2 paces toward the chamber rear, a committee leader's vocal command, a retreat to the testimony desk, and the material elimination ledger featuring the 6th notation cemented into the transcript resting upon the desk, embedded in the eternal chronicle of a legislative accountability session that the agency head desperately attempted to abandon. Exactly 7 legally binding calendar days remain. Allow me to elucidate the profound and psychological significance buried deeply within those 3 fleeting seconds. The director rose to his feet during the 6th notation, pivoted his body, walked 2 paces away, and abruptly halted his forward momentum. The official remained entirely motionless, with his spine directed toward the legislative panel for 3 entire and uninterrupted seconds. 3 seconds hardly constitutes a particularly lengthy duration of chronological time. 3 seconds represents the mere span of a single inhalation, a fleeting contemplation, or a pivotal internal ruling. Throughout those 3 seconds, a significant shift was occurring, not externally within the chamber environment, but internally within the official himself. The individual who had endured 23 legislative sessions, who had formulated rehearsed replies for every conceivable genre of accountability inquiry, whose legal team had primed him for every expected obstacle, and who had strolled into this chamber feeling utterly assured in his professional readiness. That very individual remained positioned with his spine facing the panel for 3 seconds, because the 6th notation was absent from his readiness drills, or perhaps it was included. But the drills utterly failed to simulate the visceral impact of hearing it vocalized, of feeling the summary hang in the atmosphere, while the approval cipher, the elimination protocol, and the calendar day were transcribed into the eternal chronicle by an interrogator who had reviewed the comprehensive ledger and deliberately selected that specific notation. 3 silent seconds, followed by the committee leader's vocal command, followed by the bodily retreat, and finally the physical resumption of his designated seat. 3 seconds bridged the psychological gap between rising at the 6th notation and conceding that the panel would ultimately consume the notation in its absolute entirety, regardless of his physical presence during the ongoing recitation. The committee leader's summons power served as the enforcing apparatus, yet those 3 silent seconds represented the ultimate and agonizing internal ruling. Furthermore, the choice to rotate his body and retreat to the testimony desk remains similarly documented, perhaps not within the typed transcript, but certainly within the digital broadcast footage that every single lens inside that chamber successfully secured. The choice to bodily retreat following 2 paces, following 3 seconds, while aiming his spine directly at the oversight legislative panel. Representative Porter concluded her recitation of the 6th notation, delivered her inquiries, submitted her official recommendation, and demanded a strict 7-day deadline rather than a relaxed 14-day window. The material elimination ledger remained completely and totally stationary upon the desk. The 6th notation now officially exists as an immutable and unquestionable reality. The specific approval cipher remains permanently and undeniably etched into the historical transcript. The irreversible eradication of current investigative materials prior to the anticipated deadline is now a permanently documented fact. The agency chief's attempted exit and subsequent bodily retreat are forever permanent elements of the public record. Merely 7 legally enforceable calendar days currently remain. The inquiry regarding exactly who approved the 6th notation possesses a strict 7-day window to manifest in written form, and should it fail to materialize within that time frame, the resounding silence will inevitably serve as the ultimate response. 3 fleeting seconds, 2 brief paces, a forced bodily retreat, and exactly 7 pending days. The official legislative chronicle completely contains every single facet of this intense exchange. An additional layer of complexity absolutely deserves mandatory inclusion within this ongoing narrative summary. The Congresswoman articulated a point near the conclusion of her interrogation that seamlessly tethers this session to the broader sequence of inquiries that occurred beforehand. The lawmaker mentioned witnessing uneasy testifiers grasping for hydration, displaying trembling fingers, having legal counsel leap to their feet, and having secondary attorneys enthusiastically plead the Fifth Amendment. The representative listed those specific responses before explicitly stating that she had never previously observed an agency director simply stand up and physically attempt to depart the premises. The official was subtly outlining an escalation, perhaps not directly labeling the former sessions or alternative behaviors, but rather observing that this particular response varied drastically from previous occurrences, indicating the overall tension had breached a threshold she had never witnessed. This steady and undeniable escalation naturally carries immense historical significance. Every consecutive response within this sequence has proven exponentially more dramatic than its immediate predecessor. Grasping for hydration remains an internal manifestation. A trembling finger constitutes a managed physical symptom. A leaping lawyer qualifies as an external disruption. A secondary attorney pleading the Fifth represents the gravest lawful maneuver accessible within a legislative session, and rising to completely abandon the chamber serves as the tangible embodiment of all those preceding reactions forcefully fused together. This extreme physical action signifies the human anatomy, concluding that lingering inside the chamber poses a significantly greater threat than the severe repercussions of simply fleeing the scene. The committee leader's legal summons ultimately and forcefully guaranteed his bodily return. The legislative apparatus proved more powerful than the psychological urge to flee, yet the psychological urge definitively and publicly occurred. The attempted escape genuinely materialized, featuring 2 distinct paces and 3 silent seconds, while the 6th notation remains securely cemented in the permanent transcript. This highly theatrical physical response throughout the sequence ultimately generated the absolute tightest potential time frame for regulatory compliance. 7 days instead of 14 were strictly mandated, simply because the materials were permanently eradicated, and the permanent eradication of current investigative materials demands significantly more rapid responsibility than alternative classifications of structural procedural breakdowns. 7 calendar days, the 6th notation, and 2 distinct bodily paces heading straight toward the rear of the legislative chamber. The committee leader ordered him back. Representative Porter continued her recitation, and the material elimination ledger featuring the 6th notation is undeniably permanent now, alongside every subsequent response that the 6th notation triggered, including the 3 silent seconds, the 2 paces, and the forced retreat. Merely 7 days heavily remain to logically acquire the true identity of whoever officially approved the 6th notation. The Legislative Chronicle completely preserves every single visual and auditory detail. The physical materials that were discarded have vanished entirely, yet the documentation detailing their eradication remains permanent, and the inquiry concerning who ultimately granted the approval possesses exactly 7 days to fully secure a definitive response. 7 days, the 6th notation, 2 distinct paces, 3 fleeting seconds, and a completely forced retreat. The tangible evidence has disappeared completely, while the official transcript of its eradication remains entirely indestructible.